This video is long overdue, and it's not a review. As I said before, I kind of dislike that term now. It's not even a breakdown of the game. This is an autopsy of a game, a dissection of why it suffered a fatal end. Now, people are still playing The Division. It might even spike some players around a DLC. Hey, I might even jump on it myself to see what's what and do some PvE sometime. Now, to me, how you classify if a game is dead is if it's fulfilling what it set out to be and by how wide of a margin it is doing so. The Division was meant to be Ubisoft's flagship title, its Battlefield, the game which would carry through for several years perhaps, and who knows, maybe become like a mainstay for them. It's certainly none of these things. Now, I'll hold up my hands and I will say I was flat out, no excuses, wrong about this game. I was so wrong by such a wide margin, it leaves me feeling more cynical than I ever was before. I know some of you might think that's not possible, but here we are. Now, on that note, actually, that's one reason I hate it when massively hyped up games crash and burn. Not because people should feel ripped off, but because it damages gaming. It damages how people view new purchases, and ultimately it damages the possibility for game studios to then take risks. If a game with so much invested in it, like Division, burns down, then they're certainly going to want to take at least, less risks in the future. Anyway, whatever. What we're talking about in this game is what happened from release to now. And I would say I normally talk in detail about many aspects of a game. I just don't think it's necessary for me to go into finite detail about everything that exists in this game today. Now, I can speak generally and, we'll all just get the idea. Now, with no shame at all, I will happily admit that I barely scratched the surface of what was loosely called the endgame. Why not? Because I honestly had just become bored by that point, and it wasn't boredom of the tone or location, it was the background narrative and the mechanics. Now let me just run you through my experience from beta to when I stopped playing. Before the beta was out, I was very skeptical. A lot of people were likening it to something that was going to be like DayZ in the city, and it was a game which it really didn't capture my imagination. So surprise to me, when I played the beta, this game was refreshingly enjoyable. Also, I had sort of seen some gameplay and I was just like, looks like Ghost Recon, don't really get it, whatever. Okay, but when I actually got to play in the beta, excellent world building, mechanics were there for the gameplay, it was fluid, intuitive, solid, looked beautiful, amazing, good, excellent, really fun time. Had a good time with friends completing small missions and skirmishing in the dark zone. Fast forward to release and the hype around the game was real. Everyone is playing this game, talking about it, burning through the PvE, everybody's got it going on. One of the first things that became very clear was just how fast you leveled. As someone who's played a lot of games with progression, you expect those early levels to be quickish, say an hour or so perhaps. Mid levels take a couple of hours to complete, and then the later levels maybe anything like 6 to 10 hours if you're an old WoW player, maybe a bit longer than that, right? This was absolutely not the case in the Division. I was burning through levels so fast, I skipped an entire starting area because it just held no reason for me to even go in there. Weapon progression was another bizarre thing. I often would be finding guns and gear in levels above my current loadout that were statistically inferior. It made no sense at all, and it meant that for the first, 10 to 12 levels, I barely even changed out my gear. In fact, throughout the whole leveling experience, I really only changed through maybe 3 to 4 items per slot, so I really didn't end up having to change up very much. The worst part of the leveling experience through the game, though, was the repetitiveness and overall lack of challenge that existed. I could count on one hand the missions that I had to repeat, and usually then only repeat them one time. The only time we ever really felt challenged was when we were fighting units anything like 4 to 6 levels above us, and those took a long time to outflank and battle them down. Sometimes they were simply too hard, and even if you survived, you would run out of ammo. So we were trapped in this weird no man's land between overly repetitive, easy to beat enemies and enemies that if you played smart and avoided, you couldn't just kill because of the stat barrier. Frustrating, and a concern that many people had previous to the game coming out as well. I will highlight that very often when I was playing, I had the backup from some of my guys, and sometimes they were a few levels above me, sometimes they were a few more levels above me. But the point was that even when we were playing with people who were similarly leveled, it didn't make any difference either way. I never had like a really hard time taking out enemies, whether I was solo or whether I was teaming up with the guys. It didn't make any difference either way to that kind of gameplay. I'll just say when it comes to the UI as well, the UI in terms of switching out gear, playing, generally interacting with stuff, the UI was good, it was nice, I really appreciated that aspect, so that was fine. So anyway, I battled through the evacuated and highly dangerous, yet surprisingly well-populated streets of Manhattan Island, repeating mission after mission, cherishing those few narrative-based missions that existed per area, usually a maximum of, I think, 3 from what I can remember. They were a nice break from the numbing utility missions, which usually involved pure repetition of brain-dead AI bots. Still, by the time I was about halfway through, even the story missions were starting to dry up. Attack a few waves of bad guys, a slightly tougher group of bad guys, more tough guys, and a boss with some slightly more HP. Riveting. Now, as for the Dark Zone, I barely felt any need to go into it. Why? Well, in the beta, we were starved of content, so going into the Dark Zone made sense. We also wanted to understand what it was and see how it played out. Now, after my beta Dark Zone experience, where people would, for example, shoot at you just enough to make you turn and then engage, but not enough for them to get tagged, so that they can just laugh at you being tagged yourself, and even if they don't kill you, they know that you're going to get trapped and likely be hunted down. Let's put that aside and consider that I was already, even in the earlier stages, hearing about griefing and general asshattery from friends who had ventured in. This was no surprise, I fully expected it. But I figured, hey, there isn't a great point going into the Dark Zone because in the early stages, my guns are just dealing with the enemies absolutely fine that I'm facing, so what am I going in there for? A weapon upgrade? What, to get that gear which is generally used for dismantling most of the time? But oh wait, no, all the dismantling, that's meant to be used for late game. There's a method to the nondescript madness. I can only assume that's the case because it got that from YouTube videos I watched, because the game sure as hell didn't make any attempt to highlight that you should be hoarding your dismantled loot to, use later on, so thank you for that game. But there was just very little purpose to going in there, and there you have the whole expanse of the open PvE area, and really, why would you go into the Dark Zone to get gear that you didn't even need to get, and just end up having like a frustrating experience there? Yeah, you could PvP versus a couple of other people, but then the stat-based combat in terms of the weapons just made that kind of stupid, and so the whole thing just didn't really make sense, to the point where I was just like, I really don't feel like dealing with that. Why would I? So I didn't feel like entering the Dark Zone of people thinking that they're still in DayZ, just for the sake of a gun, which may or may not be pointless for me anyway. I figured I'll just keep grinding these PvE missions because, even though they're the same, once I get to the endgame, that's what it's all worth, right? That's what we're all working towards, because all RPG games start at the endgame. Well, look, I would love to tell you how I reached the endgame and grinded for hours, getting Phoenix credits and blah 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 blah. I didn't do that. And I didn't go back to the Dark Zone either, because I simply stopped caring at all about the game. I went from coming home from work and being like, man, I've got to get on the Division, to guys saying to me, dude, you've not been on the Division for a week, do you want to play? And me being like, no. I've said it before as well, a game is not its graphics. Graphics and environment are important to be sure. Take a look at something like GTA, Alien Isolation, Star Wars Battlefront. The graphics of those games pull you into the world. They set the tone, and on a simple level, they are just enjoyable and satisfying to be a part of. Where people seem to get lost is in thinking that graphics make a good game. Now, I find myself bewildered by how often people's limitation of critique seems to be, ooh, shiny. Here's how I critique a game. If you stripped all of those graphics away and were left with a plain polygon, is that game fun? What do you judge it on? You judge it on its mechanics, its technical aspects, maybe its narrative. In a broad sense, just how good of an experience those things create. Is it enough to pull you back again and again? Now, the Division initially did this for me. The mechanics of the Division are greatly enjoyable. Teaming up with friends, working together, it's all the things we want. But in that sense, you cannot just make all those encounters the same. Similarly, teaming up to fight against other human players is fun, but not when you have some bizarre tagging system that only works when it's like, haha, you got me, I got you, and then they steal your shit. It wasn't the RPG game players wanted it to be. It wasn't the DayZ asshole simulator that those players wanted it to be. And that's even before we get to the cheaters, hackers, griefers, glitchers, copying items, and so on. All of that shit, which makes you just step back and be like, I'm done. The narrative did not meet my expectations by a wide margin. In fact, it was cliched, it was incredibly stereotypical, it had little intellectual muscle, and essentially just came back to being empty town disaster. I actually love apocalypse situations and the end of the world scenarios in narrative and writing, movies, whatever. Okay, I love them when they're done well. Things like The Road, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Mad Max, Children of Men, even Escape from New York with Kurt Russell. Yeah, it's a bit of a joke, but that movie has some elements to it which are really awesome. Some authors I enjoy who've written apocalyptic narratives as well: Philip K. Dick, Hugh Howey, Cormac McCarthy, and Margaret Atwood. All of these movies and writers create fascinating studies of the human condition and what could happen between individuals if we face a catastrophically dark future. And of course, the very obvious game, Last of Us there, of course, that's sort of tied in. Beautiful narrative, fantastic characters, amazing world, all tied together, works extremely well. The Division did none of these things. It is the Transformers World War Z approach, simply reinforcing pop culture cliches. Maybe it did this because they really were more concerned about the shooting and running around and how much trash there was in the streets, and they didn't give a shit about the credibility and depth to the narrative, or maybe it simply was just a shoddy frame to house those beautiful graphics. Either way, it was painful. The tough, no-nonsense commander lady who just wants you to get it done, the too busy to talk doctor who, thanks you for helping, now get out of my face, and the sweary, seen it all before tech man who clearly thinks you're a dimwit but doesn't want to get off his ass to go outside himself. Now scatter a few meaningless NPC characters through each zone, and you have the rich tapestry that forms the Division storyline. Oh, wait, no, you also have those discarded mobile phones and 3D snapshot things that remind us, hey, bad things happened, and the phones which tell us whatever about people we have no point of reference to care about. It's kind of like the news, you hear terrible things about other people, but you don't know them, you never will, you don't have a point of reference there, so you feel like, oh, that's a sad thing, and that's about the limit of how much you're going to invest in that story. This game should have been all about character. If they weren't going to create a truly open world survivalist experience, but instead it seems like they went for the half measure non-committal. That seems to be a growing theme among these big AAA games. They please everyone and they please no one. It's no wonder they're dying out almost as soon as they're released, because they're not catering to any market. They're pleasing people a little bit here, a little bit there. Everybody ends up being like, it's like, make a game for a certain focus. Make it about the survivalist element. Make it about narrative. Look at The Last of Us. I'm going to use that as another example. The Last of Us was not about like PvP combat. The Last of Us was not about necessarily the pure mechanics. The Last of Us was a narrative game. Okay, let's take another example. Something which is not in this world at all, but Overwatch. Overwatch is a brand new game. It remains to be seen whether or not it's going to have any sort of longevity to it. But Overwatch is focused purely square on PvP combat and team-based combat. It's focused on that, okay? Now, maybe, yeah, you can get some of those elements working together, but it's very hard to do. And with something like this, it would be a much better bet. I would have loved this game if they just went down one route or the other. If they said, hey, forget about all this storyline, forget about all this stuff. They drop you in there, you have a loose sense of like, hey, we're in this city and something bad happened, now we've got to survive and fight it out. There you go, bang, get on with it, all right? Make it a narrative game. Don't have any other players in there. Make it a PvE experience primarily. Maybe have a few little blocks as a like tacked on multiplayer. Do something like that, okay? Work one way or the other. Stop trying to do everything, because you just run into problems and limitations and conflicts between the two things. And ultimately, this stuff is very expensive, and you end up kind of having to compromise everywhere, and you end up with something which is nothing. Talking about numbers of sales, console markets always seem to have a lower attrition of players than PC. I attribute this to the much smaller choice of games available on console, but recent reports have shown that the player base of the Division has dropped anything like 90% since its launch on PC. Now, it's always said that you can use stats to prove anything, and as I say, console and PC numbers differ greatly. But just have a search on Google. Go judge this stuff for yourself. It's not hard to find. Just go type it in, look. A much better gauge is simply to say this: how many YouTubers and streamers who you saw playing the Division back-to-back at release are still making content about it? Exactly. I guess that's all I really actually need to say about the Division. That and the fact that I'm kicking myself. I truly believe that based on the beta experience and overall expectation, this title will be one that I'd be playing for at least a full year. How wrong I was. Spending out on that season pass seems like money I literally could have just burned now. So I guess I'll leave you just with a couple of thoughts here. Firstly, that I'm still waiting for a game developer to do justice to the apocalyptic survivalist experience. And here's an idea. Take something like Alterac Valley from World of Warcraft and translate that into an apocalyptic world. In short, let me just tell you really quick what Alterac Valley was in World of Warcraft. You would have two factions at the end of a long valley. You had to fight through the valley to defeat the other team's main NPC character, their boss, right? It was a mix of AI and human players throughout the valley. You all had varying gear. You had to capture various points throughout the valley, not unlike Conquest. Over time, these would then spawn friendly AI, enabling you to gain a foothold, because those AI were pretty hardcore to take them down, right? There were also NPC quests throughout the valley that you could break off and complete to provide support, and even powerful summoned creatures to help you break a deadlock. It played incredibly well, and games would often last for hours fighting running battles. Take that, put it in an apocalypse setting, done. Ultimately, I would love to see an apocalypse game which is a true survival experience, not a piece of shit like DayZ, which revolves around people just fucking each other over back to back endlessly. I want to see something which focuses more on the survival aspect and makes the prospect of taking a human life a big deal. Namely, that it should be so difficult to survive that having someone assist you far outweighs the waste of killing them. And also, at the same time, if you were to lose someone in your party, if someone did get killed, it's a big deal. It's the opposite of that in DayZ. Surviving isn't hard in that game, so taking down other players is basically all there is to do. I don't even know why that game tries to be a survival game anymore. They should just make it a smaller battleground map from the airfields and the other bits and pieces. Have done with. Just get on with all the fighting bullshit. But if, though, you had to instead spend time in, say, a starting area that was perhaps initially a safe zone or, an instance area, then you have to branch out, journey to other villages, or just explore, find resources, bring them back to your own village, which, the village maybe is NPC based and you can team up with other people. I don't know, but I think there should be a better balance when it comes to judging the life of others in game. So, Division, final summary, disappointment. It promised so much, but yet again, time and time again, where was the support from the producer? Where was the support from Ubisoft? Where was the support to protect players against the misery of hacking and cheating? It was enough to just completely turn me off. I don't want to fucking deal with that. The repetition, dear God, the repetition. I hate it when you end up just running through areas going like la 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 whatever, because you're missing so much of that environment. You're not pulled into it, and you're not pulled into it because if you're challenged by the enemies, you feel the environment, you feel what's going on more, but you don't when it's so easy and you're just kind of running around like bang 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 whatever. Hallway after hallway I was running through zones, and that's exactly what I was doing. I'm going to sign off by saying just yet again, I'll finish with this final thought for you guys. Graphics do not make the game. Stop seeing shiny graphics when they're talking about a game early release and fawning over them. Games are not about graphics. Graphics are an important element, but it is not the core focus. The core focus should be the things which bring you back to the game, the things that make the game work, and the solid technical foundations of netcode and things like that. The stuff which keeps that experience solid, which makes you come back to it again and again so that you get a reliable experience. If the Division had those kind of reliability things, if they had made it so that the missions were nicely varied in PvE, if they had made the PvP so that there was a true purpose to get in there and really get that stuff beyond just upgrading your gear, then maybe there would have been some, sort of more drive towards it. But none of that happened, and for that reason, I'm out.